Hi, my name is Claire. I've been working with the Edible Garden Project for 4 years now, going into my 5th season. And I was previously the program manager, and I'm actually taking over as the farm manager this season. So that's pretty exciting. I'm looking forward to being outside more. I'm definitely more of an outdoor person than inside. So yeah, looking forward to that. And today I'm tuning in from the traditional ancestral unceded territories of Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations. And our main growing site of the Edible Garden Project is located on those lands as well. And unceded means that the land was never given up, it was taken away. And this is really important, especially as farmers and folks that are interacting with our land, to always keep this in mind, especially when it comes to agriculture. So the type of agriculture that we practice at Lutet Farm within the Edible Garden Project, and the kind of farming food production that I'm talking about today, is a colonial type of agriculture. And yeah, it's important to remember that our farm and all of us are not excused from this. So the Edible Garden Project, part of our mission is to create a community where access to growing and sharing fresh, healthy food is possible for all people. And we really hope to feed all communities, especially those that have been stewarding this particular land for a very, very long time. So yeah, with that, I'm just going to tell you a little bit more about what we're going to be talking about today. So yeah, I'm going to start by just giving a little bit of an outline of the Edible Garden Project, if you don't already know about us. And then we're going to talk about seed and seed starting basics. I'm kind of going to break it down into a couple points. We'll talk about starting seeds indoors, going to the potting up stage and transplanting, and then I'll also touch on starting seeds outdoors. And then if we have time, we can talk about saving seeds as well, although that is kind of a whole other topic, which we might have a presentation on later. I'm actually not sure if there's one in the spring session or the fall, but we've done it previously. So anyways.
Usually we do one in the early fall.
Nice. Yeah, that's usually the time when seed saving is most relevant. So the Edible Garden Project, we are a nonprofit that is a program of the North Shore Neighborhood House. So the North Shore Neighborhood House is a community center in North Vancouver. And the Edible Garden Project, we kind of focus on food programming. So whether that's food systems, education, or actually growing food at our farm sites. And our mission is to create a thriving community culture that values local food systems through growing food gardens while sharing the bounty and educational resources. So we kind of wrap that all up into grow, share, teach. I'll just touch on these a little bit. So grow, we have 2 urban farm sites. It's just under an acre of growing space. And we grow food for the community, and we sell this at our twice weekly farmers markets. So just a little note about when our farmers markets happen. The first market is May 7th. So anyways, you're all welcome. I'll talk a little bit about that market later. But it's really fun way to get local food in your community. That's we grow, we share. We also have 5 garden sites located around North Vancouver, as well as those 2 farm sites. And this is where we have volunteer teams that grow food exclusively for donation to the food bank. So it's pretty awesome. Last year, we distributed over 5,000 pounds of fresh produce. And we have 38 volunteers that are specifically part of those gardens. And then we also do a lot of teaching. So we do programming for elementary school age kids. We have high school programs. We hold youth drop-in volunteering sessions. And then we also do these gardening workshops for the Lynn Canyon Ecology Centre and lots of other organizations in North Van and around the Lower Mainland. So anyways, that's just a little quick overview of all the things that we do. There's lots more information on our website. You can see it at the bottom of all the slides there. So please check us out and subscribe to our newsletter to get the most up-to-date information on what we're up to. But let's move to the topic today. So seed starting. So gardening and food growing is definitely all about experimentation. That's really the best way to learn is by doing it. But it can get pretty complicated with all the kind of details and things you can read out there. And you also only get one chance per year to kind of practice each thing because farming is so tied to the seasonal, just seasonality of the year. So I thought I'd just break seed starting down into kind of 5 key things that will hopefully increase your chances of success as you're starting out your process, or if you've already been starting seeds, maybe this will kind of just get you starting a few more seeds or having a bit more success with growing. So I broke it down into timing, soil, heat, light, and water. So timing, this is one of the biggest kind of mistakes or things that I see my friends and other folks, if they're not having success. Timing is really important, especially like on the coast, on the West Coast where we're located. The weather, the spring season is very, it's kind of a very variable in terms of weather. So like last week, it was super warm. It was beautiful weather. Everyone was excited to like plant all their seeds right away. But of course, as we're seeing, like yesterday, there was snow where I was just a little bit, and it's still pretty cold out there. So it's just something to keep in mind about not starting things too early. A lot of the time when you're looking at when to start seeds, it will refer to something called last frost date. That's something you can look up in our area here in the Lower Mainland. The last frost date is around the end of March. But like I mentioned, because we're located next to the ocean, there's a lot of weather systems coming through. That definitely varies. So pay attention to what is happening in the weather, get used to looking ahead, forecasting. And if there is a really sunny day, you're really keen to start, you want to start all your seeds, but you're realizing it's still, say early March, what you could do instead is start to prepare your outdoor beds for planting. If it's like a really nice day and you just want to get out there, there's always lots to do there. There's always lots of prepping the soil, amending it, adding compost, things like that. Just a note on timing, just be aware of what the temperatures are looking like in your area. And I'll talk about that in a little bit later as well. But don't be worried about feeling like it all has to happen right now at the beginning of, mid-March. Oftentimes, if you start things super early and don't really have a place to put them, you end up getting these really big or really leggy seedlings that are wanting to go outside or get moved into a bigger container, and it's way too cold outside. And you end up kind of stunting things anyways. So timing is really important. The next thing that is very important is soil. So I really believe that when you're starting seeds, you really want to start with a sterilized seed starting mix. That's usually something that you would buy from the garden store. Some folks think you could just go to your garden and take some garden soil and use that for starting your seeds, but I really would not recommend that. And the reason is because when seedlings are just starting to grow, they're at their most vulnerable. And they're really vulnerable to anything that might be in your garden soil. So like mold, fungi, insects, diseases, things like that maybe wouldn't bother the more mature plants that are out in your garden, but the tiny baby seedlings are really not going to be happy with that. So I would say, investing in a nice sterilized potting mix or seed starting mix is really key. These kind of packaged soil mixes are also really predictable for structure and drainage, and some have a little bit of nutrients added to them as well. So definitely would recommend this is a really important part. And as you can see in this picture, I actually sometimes will bleach my seed trays when I'm reusing them from year to year. But as long as you're using something that's clean, that's the most important thing. And you don't have to use these big trays if you're not doing that many seeds. You could use anything that you want, really. Some folks like to use egg cartons or an old container. You just need to make sure that it has drainage. So you want to poke some holes through that. But yeah, anything that's a few inches deep for holding the soil and has drainage could be used. And you'll practice with find out what works best for you. So the third point is heat. And this is a really important one. I mean, they're all important. But I remember learning that most seeds don't actually need any light to start. They just need heat and moisture. And that really blew my mind when I realized that. So what I mean is to start germination, that's the point from when the seed breaks out of its little tiny seed coat and starts growing. And yeah, most seeds don't actually need any light. You could keep them in total darkness as long as they're warm and moist, and they would start. But as soon as the plant pops its head above the soil surface, then it's going to need a lot of light. And that's the next thing we'll talk about. So yeah, heat is really important. When we start our seedlings at Lutet Farm, we actually have heat mats. So they're electric mats that provide a nice even source of heat underneath all of the seed trays. And you're aiming for somewhere near 70 degrees Fahrenheit or about 21 degrees Celsius. But you don't need to go out and buy fancy heat mats. You could if you wanted to kind of step up your game a little bit, but just making sure that when you're starting your seeds, you're keeping them somewhere warm. So near a heater, on top of the fridge is where a lot of folks start their seeds. And providing heat at the start is important for a lot of reasons. So the heat speeds up the germination rate of your seeds. Oh, and yeah, I clarified what germination means. That's when it's just starting to grow. So heat speeds up germination rates. And this is really important because it reduces the risk of these tiny little baby seedlings being exposed to any diseases or any issues. If the plant is growing quickly, then it's less likely to be in that kind of danger zone when it's very, very tiny. But heat also reduces mold growth, reduces disease, all those things. So it's really kind of thinking about all of these points that I'm going to mention in conjunction is really important because they all kind of affect each other. Okay, so that's heat. And then the fourth one is light. So we just learned that most seeds don't actually need light to start germination. There are a couple exceptions. I will mention lettuce and sunflower seeds do need light right off the bat to start growing. But everything, as soon as the plants pop their heads above the soil surface, they will need a lot of light. And this is another thing that I see folks kind of struggling with when they're first learning how to start seeds. So if you have insufficient light, you will have what's called leggy seedlings. And that's kind of just exactly what it sounds like. Those seedlings get really, really long because they're stretching to try and find some light. And this, you really don't want your plants to become leggy for a number of reasons. So plants that are leggy often have very weak, thin stems, and they could fall right over. Sometimes their heads could even just snap right off from the weight of the top leaves. Or even if the leaves are just bending over and lying on the soil surface, that is an entry point for disease as well. Even if you've bought your nice sterile seed starting mix, that still could happen. So yeah, as you can see in this picture, this was my little setup for seedling growth from last year at my house. And I have these fluorescent light tubes. You can use any kind of grow lights. But I will say that in this picture, the lights are actually quite far above the surface of the soil. You don't really want that. I actually ended up changing this setup You kind of want the lights to be very, very close to the soil surface. So like 2 inches above the plants. And as the plants grow, you can move the lights up. Yeah, and lights are, yeah, I really would recommend buying some grow lights. I see folks just having their seedlings in the window. That can work, but again, this is where kind of starting your seeds interacts with the timing aspect. At this time of year, the days are getting longer, but it's still not really that much light, especially when you get many days like today where there's not sun at all, no sun to be seen. In this part of the world at this time in the year, there is not really enough light to have your seedlings growing really vigorously. Even in a south facing window, I still find that at this time of year, it's not really enough. Maybe in April, it would be enough, but you're looking to give your seedlings around 14 to 16 hours of light. That is ideal for them. Yeah.
Claire, we just had a question as well. This is a good time for a couple of questions because light was a big question for a couple of people initially. One of them was a question about using a greenhouse. So, and I know you made the point that light is the key. So the greenhouse wouldn't necessarily change that unless you have lights in your greenhouse, but they were wondering, did they still need lights if they have a greenhouse? And then the other question was if you could address the specific distance between seedlings and artificial light.
Yeah, so like I'll touch on the second one first. So yeah, the distance between the lights and the plants is quite small, like about 2 inches is really what you want. So these, in this picture, those lights should be lowered a lot closer to the surface of the soil. And as the plants grow, you can move it up. So you maintain that like couple inches distance. In terms of if you have a greenhouse, do you still need light? Yeah, it depends. It depends on how much light your greenhouse gets. Is it in full sun? Is there kind of like, there's not any trees kind of nearby that are blocking off the amount of light that it's getting? And yeah, I guess I'll mention that last year we were just building our greenhouse at the farm, our seedling greenhouse, and we didn't have any lights installed in it yet. So we actually started everything at home for March, and that we did that because we had lights at home. That hence this like funny setup that I have in my laundry room in this picture. By the time it was April, it was fine. We could have things at the farm in the greenhouse with no lights. By April, the days were long enough. The weather was generally better. So if you don't want to buy lights, that's fine. I would just recommend starting your seeds later in the year, just a little bit later, like a few weeks into April, the first few weeks of April, then you could. But if you want to get a jump on the season, that's where I would recommend. There's kind of no point in going for that like early starting unless you're properly set up with lights. I also wanted to mention, so another part about just focusing on growing healthy plants, and that is that if your seedlings are really thin, they're getting leggy and weak, they're more susceptible to what's called damping off. You might have heard of this. It's a fungal disease in soil. And you'll notice this if you see that your seedlings are looking okay, maybe they're looking a little bit leggy, but the next time you see them, they've like fallen over or just totally shriveled up, especially if you see the stem getting really, really shriveled up, that could be damping off. And that's just where things like having sufficient heat, having sufficient light will just grow healthier plants in general. Yeah, we could talk a lot about light, but I'll move on for now to water, the kind of final of our 5 main points. So watering, I always water my potting mix first. When you buy it from the store, if you're buying your sterile potting mix, it often comes very, very dry. And that's just because it's lighter to move around. So I would water the soil first before I even put it into the seed trays. And you're going for the consistency of a wrung out sponge. So you're kind of want to mix up your soil, get like maybe a big Tupperware container or something like that, mix it up, add water. And you want it so that when you kind of make a clump with the soil, you want it to hold together. You don't want it so wet that when you squeeze it into a ball, there's water dripping out of it. So you're kind of going for that sweet spot of evenly damp, but not soggy. And yeah, water is really crucial in the first, especially in the very, very beginning of the seed's life. You probably will want to water your seedlings every day until they germinate, especially because seeds want to be just nice, evenly damp to begin their lives. And once they're seedlings too, you want to be watching them very, very diligently. You don't ever want the soil to really dry out, again, because they're very, very small, very needy little babies. They want to be just kind of evenly moist all the time. So yeah, that's water. I kind of made a little note about kind of creating a little mini greenhouse at first. If you want to, you can kind of put like some people use plastic wrap over like a seed tray. And that's just for the very beginning, before you see anything popping its head above the soil. Once you see anything popping their head above the soil, then you'll want to provide some airflow and make sure that there's not you're not creating like a environment for diseases. So I'm going to move on just in the interest of time. The next step, once your seedlings have popped their heads up, they're getting a few leaves on them. Usually it's been around like 3 to 4 weeks. Sometimes what you can do is pot them up, and that just means taking them from what you've started them in, their little egg cartons, say, and moving them into a bit of a bigger pot. So this can help prevent overcrowding if you've planted a few seeds in each little egg cup. And it's good to do it if your seedlings are getting too big. You want to kind of let them have a bit more space to grow. Not all gardeners do this, but it can just be helpful if you aren't quite ready to plant your seedlings out in the garden yet. It's maybe still a little bit too cold. Yeah, that or they're just getting too crowded. You want to kind of give them each their own space. So generally at the farm, we will sow our seeds, and then about 3 to 4 weeks after that, we'll pot them up. We'll leave them in their new pots for about 2 weeks, and then we'll transplant. And what is transplanting? Transplanting is basically just taking your seedlings and planting them in the ground, wherever you've decided to plant them. So it's really important to what's called harden off your seedlings before you plant them in the ground. And that is, that's just where you leave them outside in their pots for a few days before actually transplanting them. And that's because transplanting is just a bit of a shock to the plant. Anytime you're disturbing a plant's roots is a bit of a shock. They will bounce back from it, they'll recover, but it's good to say you want to transplant your seedlings in a few days. You'll just take out your tray of seedlings, maybe leave it outside for a couple hours one day, bring it back in at night. And then the next day, maybe you'll leave it out all day, bring it back in at night. And then the third day, you'd leave it out all day, all night. The next day you transplant. So in order to transplant, you want to make sure that you've already nicely prepared the area that you're going to plant. And you want to make sure you've weeded it, used maybe a garden fork to aerate the soil, because plants need air and they need to grow into a nice fluffy bed of soil. So once you've prepared your nice area, you want to add some nutrients to that soil too, so compost or amendments. And yeah, you kind of want to just gently break up the root ball of the plant that you're going to be putting in the ground, and bury it right up to the bottom leaves where they're attaching to the stem. And always make sure you water after you transplant. That's very, very key. And then hopefully, yeah, at this stage, you have already put in the work to grow really nice, vigorous, healthy seedlings by following all those things we talked about. And hopefully at this stage, you're just wanting to set yourself up for success. So you want to be putting nice, healthy plants into the soil. And also, if you want to, you can skip the whole first step of starting the seeds and just go to buying transplants. It is a little bit more expensive, and there's sometimes it's not as easy to get exactly what you want. But if you're finding that you just don't have a good setup for starting seeds at your house, or you just want to skip all the constant watering every single day, you can go straight to buying transplants. And for some things I would recommend for beginner gardeners to feel like you have success is just to buy some healthy transplants and put those in the ground. And that's totally fine too. I'll just touch on starting seeds outdoors as well, because what I've talked about, starting seeds inside, growing a little seedling and then transplanting it outside, you don't need to do that for every crop. It is helpful for most crops, but I would say that the things that I always just start directly in the ground are peas, beans, roots, and greens. That's kind of how I remember it. So peas and beans, they're just quite a big seed. They're a hardier seed. They can handle being outside. They don't need to be pre-started inside and kind of babied along. But just make sure you're starting those, you're checking what the soil temperature is. And here, yeah, it's good to touch on soil temperature when you're planting things outside. Things like peas, they can go in the soil when it's a little bit cooler. So some people are starting their peas now or around the end of March. But things like beans really don't want to be in cold soil. You want to wait a while till you start those. And we'll talk a little bit more about how you know when to start things. So yeah, that's peas and beans. That's why I start those outside. But also all root crops I would start directly outside. So that's like carrots, beets, turnips, radishes. And this is because most of those grow as a taproot, and they just don't really like being transplanted. So generally I would just sow those directly. If I was in my garden, I would just sow them by hand. You can kind of plant lots of seeds just to see what comes up. And then if everything comes up, you can thin them out. That's where you kind of selectively pick out some of the little plants to leave everything with enough space. And for greens, yeah, I would plant those outside as well. That's like salad mix or spinach and kale. These things grow pretty quickly. There's no point in really starting them as transplants and then starting them as seedlings and transplanting them outside. So yeah, you really want to pay attention to the last average frost date and the nighttime temperatures in your area. Most everything doesn't really want to be in the soil if it's less than 10 degrees in the soil. So you're looking for around 10 degrees at night, at least, to start planting things. And it's kind of awesome to start things outside because, one thing to think about is the space that you have in your garden. You don't have to fill it all up right away with seeds in March and April. You can sow a few seeds, you can leave some space. Say you're doing salad mix, you can do a little bit, let that mature. A couple weeks later, you sow a little bit more. And that way you can have kind of a succession of plants that are becoming available throughout the season. So in general, there's a lot of details to know about all plants. This is why I'm saying that, yeah, there's just a lot to consider when you're farming and thinking about all the different crops you want to grow. Each crop has its own specific spacing and temperature and like everything about it. They're all unique, and that's why it's very handy to have something like a crop planning tool from West Coast Seeds. West Coast Seeds has a lot of great resources, especially about all of the timing for different things. There's no point in me trying to talk about timing of different crops because there's so many crops that folks like to grow. And yeah, I can't memorize all that. And you don't have to, because there are these great resources. So yeah, I definitely would recommend using this to figure out how far apart to plant things, look at the temperature that they each like to germinate at. And yeah, just kind of take as much of it as you can as you practice this. And it is definitely a skill and a practice. You'll get used to the timing of what things follow what, and oh, it's this, it's getting warmer now, I plant beans, or things like that. It'll come with practice. And just a note on where to buy seeds. Yeah, West Coast Seeds has a lot of seeds, and they are not, West Coast Seeds doesn't grow out, they don't produce very many of their own types of seeds. They're a seed distributor, so they have seed growers all over the States and Canada, and they kind of amalgamate all the seeds and sell them. But they do have lots of very cool varieties. They have organic varieties, and yeah, lots of interesting things. But if you did want to buy seeds that were grown like in this region, I'd recommend checking out the BC Eco Seed Co-op. They are a local co-op of seed growers that are all located in our region. And yeah, they have lots of organic or ecologically grown seeds, definitely regionally selected. So they pick things that grow well in this area. And then just another plug for our seedling sale. So we, at the Edible Garden Project, we grow a bunch of seedlings that we sell to the community, and we'll be selling all of these at our first community market, which is happening on May 7th. It's located at Lutep Farm. You can find that by looking on Google Maps. It's close to Lutep Park. So yeah, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. On May 7th, we will be selling seedlings like tomatoes, kale, chard, zucchini, peppers, kohlrabi, squash, some flower seedlings. And we'll also have a community market too. So there'll be other vendors selling food and crafts and lots of awesome things. And we will also be selling compost at this seedling sale too. So you can buy your compost and add it to your garden beds and transplant right away. So you can kind of get your Insta garden going. We like to help you out with the first couple steps. It's 10:35, so I had a couple notes about saving seeds, but I think we will save that for another time. Just kind of a note.
Save the seed saving.
Yeah, exactly. Save the seed saving.
All right. We do have a few great questions here.
Cool.
Would you be okay to go over to questions?
Yeah, that sounds great. I'll just leave this slide up. It's got all of our contact information there. And when in doubt, just head to our website, ediblegardenproject.com, and you should find everything you're looking for. But yeah, questions would be awesome.
So I've just gone back to the very beginning. So I see one near the beginning asking about putting a dome on once seedlings break the soil. So I'm assuming that's like a mini greenhouse or cloche or something like that.
Yeah, so yeah, I would actually recommend putting the mini greenhouse on right away. So what I would do is sow the seeds, make sure it has lots of water, it's damp, and then put the kind of like plastic dome or plastic wrap or cloche or rime. It's like a very thin fabric that is specific for gardening. Because you really, at that point in the seed's life, kind of before it has popped above the surface, you really want it to be nice and moist. It's just all about keeping the moisture and the temperature up. But once the seeds pop out over the surface, I have found that starting at my house, it's more important to have airflow at that time. You don't want the soil to be, it just gets I have found when I've tried to keep the dome on for longer in an interest of like, oh, I'll just keep it on the whole time. It'll keep things warmer, it'll keep things more damp. Once the plant gets above the soil surface, then you kind of have to worry about things like mold, growth. So yeah, I would take it off once you see the little green plants coming above the soil surface.
Awesome. Someone has mentioned that they use 50% seed starting mix with 50% indoor soil, mix it up, wet it, use soil blockers. Can you please tell folks about soil blockers so that we don't have to use as many plastic pots?
Yes, what a great question. Soil blocking is a technique where you actually, there's a special tool that you can buy. You kind of pack your potting mix into like a little mold, almost like a little block, I guess. And then you kind of pop it out with this special tool. it's like you're creating little cells of soil, but you aren't using the plastic. And I usually mention this, I just didn't have time this presentation, but yeah, plastic is a really tricky, I, like many other small farmers, have a really complicated relationship with plastic because, of course, so much of what we do, we are wanting to not create garbage, not, rely on these products for success. But I have found that in the scale that we're currently growing at Lutet, it is just so much easier, especially because farm work is very labor intensive. But yeah, please experiment with doing soil blocking. I've never done it on a large scale, but I know that folks have a ton of success with it. I'm sure at somewhere like Lee Valley or a garden store, you could find a little soil blocking tool, especially if you're not doing very many plants. It definitely would be worth it to practice making the soil blocks and get away from plastic. So yeah, go for it. I haven't had too much experience with it, so I can't offer any more than that, but definitely very much into using less plastic whenever possible.
And then this might be a fast one. How many seeds do you typically plant in each little pot?
Yeah, generally, if I'm planting in like a seed tray, so like quite a small space, just one per pot, I guess. But yeah, it kind of depends. Generally, the smaller the seed, and some of my flower seeds are like teeny tiny minuscule seeds. The smaller the seed, the harder time it's going to have growing. So if I'm not sure, if I'm like, ooh, I don't know, this is a really tiny seed, I'll put a few in each little cell. And then if I need to, at the transplanting stage, I can gently break them apart and plant one each in its own little pot once I'm potting up, it's called. Or you can pinch them and just leave one growing in that space. So yeah, it depends on the size of the seed. Generally just one. Plants don't really like to share, so letting everybody have their own space is the most important. But yeah, if it's a really tiny seed, or if you are using old seeds too, if you have seeds, it's hard to use up a whole seed packet within one season. Say you have seeds that are a few years old, you're like, I don't know if these are still good. You could try planting a bunch of seeds in one little cell, see how many come up. And then you can, pinch off the all the extras if you only want one per cell. So yeah.
And this one, I'm not sure what stage you're talking about. This is a question from Eileen. She's asking, would you bury all plants to the bottom leaves? So I'm assuming that we're at some sort of transplant stage here.
Yeah, sure. Yes, pretty much. And that's kind of a nice way that if your seedlings have gotten a little bit leggy, you can kind of save them a little bit or counteract that by burying them up to that first leaf. It's important to know where it's called the growing tip of your plant is. It's kind of hard to explain this without like a picture, but just identifying where the plant growth is coming from. It's usually at the very center of the plant. And you just want to make sure that part is not buried. But most plants are pretty, like, you can bury quite a bit of them as long as the growing tip is above the soil surface. So as a general rule, I would say, yeah, you can bury all seedlings up until that first leaf. I can't think if there's any that wouldn't want that treatment. You just want them to be really nice, firmly in the soil, not at risk of blowing over, especially when you're taking them from inside to outside where there's wind and all that. So yeah.
Okay, and a couple people have said they've tried soil blocking and it works really well. Someone said that West Coast Seeds also has the tool. So there you go. If you're buying some of your seeds, maybe you can buy a soil blocking tool. There was a question about planting out early with some kind of protection. Any recommendations for doing that? Sure,
yeah, I touched on a product called Remay. You can buy this at garden centers as well. It's a very thin white fabric that lets light and water through it. And we use this at the farm all the time. Not a lot of home gardeners use it that I've seen, but it is super, super handy. If you're wanting to plant things, actually there's a couple things you could think about as like little forms of protection for your baby seedlings if you're planting them out early. So one is remay. You can lay it right over the plants. You just want to make sure that you're weighing down the sides with something heavy, bricks or something like that. And yeah, you can look up remay on, it's REMAY. But you can also use what's called cold frames, and there's lots of really creative and awesome designs for cold frames in the garden. Folks, you repurpose old windows. It's like kind of just like creating a little mini greenhouse environment for your seedlings, and you're kind of creating a microclimate in your garden. So if you put seedlings out, you can kind of pop like a little cold frame over top. It's basically like a box made of glass, kind of, depending on the design. There's tons. You can look them all up. It's very cool. That you're just wanting to let light through and contain some of that heat in your little environment for the seedlings. So any amount of protection that you can give seedlings if you're wanting to plant out early is helpful.
So I have a couple more questions here and then we'll wrap up. So someone was asking about peat pots, and peat pots are always a bit controversial. So maybe you can summarize that, Claire.
Yeah, it is controversial. You know, these are such great questions. There's so much that that farms and gardens rely on that I feel like, you know, we really need to question. Peat is definitely one of them. So peat moss is a product that's used in a lot of like seed starting mixes or like pots made of peat. But peat is harvested from like wetland, I guess peat bogs, which are they're environments that are really important for biodiversity, and they're kind of like endangered spaces in a way, endangered environments. There's not a lot of them left. I think they're really important for storing carbon too. Anyways, there are some people like them because it's like a biodegradable kind of pot that you can use, but they are coming out with more alternatives. So coconut coir or coir, it's COIR, is like coconut husk. I think it's a byproduct of the coconut industry. That is a biodegradable kind of pot substance that folks have been starting to use more these days. And I think, yeah, just keeping up to date on what the new kind of alternatives for some of these products are is really important. Again, because we grow on a large scale at the farm, even an acre, you know, it's not huge by any means, but it's large enough that using something like coconut coir pots or peat pots isn't feasible for us at the moment. But yeah, I don't know. You can research so much about the different agricultural products, and if any folks find any more sustainable options, I always recommend, doing your research and trying to find those.
So there's a couple of recommendations and then one last question that I had for you. So one person says that Lee Valley says that they sell self-watering windowsill seed starters, that Fiskars has like a dual seed block type of soil block type of system, and that the Bay has a great little greenhouse. So there you go, lots of different recommendations. So last question here. Someone was asking about remay and whether it protects from slugs.
Kind of, it can. You really have to like secure the sides all the way along the row. Like really tuck it in. Maybe it's like tucking into kind of burying it under the soil. But yeah, slugs is a tricky one. It's not super great for that. It's more, Remade protects more against like flying insects, insect pests, I would say. But yeah, in terms of, yeah, there's always so many questions about slugs. I would say the healthier your seedlings are, the better chance you will have against pests. That honestly, that is like our main technique at the farm. We don't use any pesticides, of course, but we don't even use any like natural insect pest repellents. We just grow enough and try and grow really healthy seedlings that if we lose a few, we don't mind. But of course, it's a different scale in your backyard garden where you can only have maybe a few plants. So yeah, I would say making sure they're really healthy. Some folks use things like diatomaceous earth, which is a natural kind of pest repellent for slugs, or setting beer traps, or yeah, those are the ones that first come to mind. But Remade is not particularly good for slugs necessarily. Might have a little bit of protection from that.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Claire. And thank you so much for everyone for coming today. And I wanted to let folks know that we have an ongoing series. So if you go to the Ecology Centre website, Lynn Canyon Ecology Centre.ca, and you head over there, then you go to the adult tab, and you will see a whole bunch of different programs coming up that are seed and garden related. So you can head over there and sign up for as many as you want and let your friends know there are still some spaces. And this particular program will also be on our website. So you can go to the same page and find the ones that have already been done. So thank you so much for teaching us about seed starting today, Claire.
My pleasure. Yeah, hope I see you or somebody else from Edible Garden Project might be giving